All right. I lied to you. We didn't wrap up all those loose ends that I was trying to do. There was still some, but I just didn't want to give you the, as that great philosopher Mr. Penniman said, the heebie-jeebies. So we still have some unplowed seedlings that I never used, but perhaps we'll wrap them up. At least that last batch from last year, either tonight, and if not tonight, who knows? So we'll still pretend that these are just little headlines, and I may or may not say anything after I look them back over after all this length of time. And you can pretend that they are more or less unconnected, etc., for those of you that enjoy such as that. There is a belief, if you'll notice, and it is way beyond the confines of religion, but there is a belief that man is capable, man with a little m, that man is capable of specific, separate, good and evil, which is no secret, but what I wanted you to try and consider was that this is a direct support to help perpetrate the concept of an episodic existence. Now, I could use other things. I could cut down and be more specific than the whole category of man and make it apply to those that are more centered in the ordinary intellectual function and refer to man is capable of discovering, being led by, quote, the truth, or being misled by error and misinformation, etc. But good and evil, even in a non-religious context, about hits the center of it, if you follow what I'm pointing at. To believe that man is capable of acts, and thinking, in this case, being an act. That such acts are capable of being divided into distinct, separate, specific, ungraduated, although a reasonably sophisticated ordinary person nowadays might say that there are indeed areas wherein man is not engaged in moralistic acts or any kind of act that the acts are absolutely black or white, right or wrong, good or evil, that there are, under certain conditions, shades of gray. Big deal. That does not matter. That's an old story. Philosophers have been playing around with that in the Western world, at least from the time of the Greeks, that we know of, that you know of. I don't know about it, I just heard about it. But even someone apparently being primed and driven to exercise their tongue and lips in a way that sounds as though they are being more broad-minded, that man does engage in certain acts that are not capable of being absolutely adjudicated as being good or evil, but there are middle grounds wherein it's open to some debate. That's not the point. Even people who are doing that are still supporting the concept of an episodic existence, because they are saying that besides these areas that I personally see as being not absolutely good or bad, this or that, one or two, left or right, by saying that, they're also tacitly supporting still the idea that somewhere outside this middle area, there are areas wherein man has been, continues to be absolutely capable of despicable, unexcusable, unredeemable evil. Now, amongst other things, besides keeping religion going, besides furnishing the kinds of energy necessary to keep life's body going through man in various ways, what I wanted you to try and consider was specifically the effect this has on the nervous system. And those of you getting good, of course, the nervous system having an effect on this. But we can only talk about one thing at a time, right? And, well, yes, and unless we're going to make less sense than it makes sometimes. Would you hold it down over there? I don't need those kind of comments. As long as the human nervous system, when it reaches the area wherein it thinks and speaks, in man and now in you individually, or any individual, that there is still no doubt, there is no question whatsoever that man is capable of specific, You understand now what I mean by specific? That is distinct, that there are acts that are per se evil. There are no redeeming qualities, there are no conditions, there is no way to excuse it. That I should have never, I can still remember the time that I told my mother, well, I didn't say it out loud, but I said, boy, I wish you were dead. All the way from that to, they say that Mussolini was not at all a nice fellow sometimes. And of course Attila, we always have to pick on him, but of course notice he does not have a church or any sort of continuing, even the ashes of any political group that might come over and give us trouble. So it's easy to pick on him. Whereas Mussolini, you got to watch it. There's supposed to, supposedly some neo-fascists still around. But at any rate, people on tape, that was not serious, by the way. In case any of you now are getting up looking out your windows. As long as there is in the individual the concept that it is possible to do unredeemable, absolutely specific, separate acts of, I'm still calling it good and evil, but we could call it something else. Could be right or wrong, this or that. As long as that is still part of the operations of your nervous system in the brain, then the concept, the acceptance, without any analyzation, that life is episodic is unavoidable. It's inescapable. And all concepts which you're left with on that basis of there being local reality, that is, that your concept, your perception has real validity. It's open to some further investigation, but that at least the heart of your concept of local reality is well-founded, as well-founded as the next person. As long as that's going on, you have got to see, or you should begin to see for your own benefit, you people on tape, that's just a joke. Like the fascists, about for your own benefit. So, don't worry about it. To see that life is not episodic, or to see that withal, if you're going to continue to take life as episodic, there is no way to get outside the local definition, the local concept of you and reality. That is always sequential, it will always be chopped up, it will always be what I intend by the term episodic. This happens, I turn away and I sigh, I put my hands in my pockets, and by God, that happens. I no longer have to fend off or attempt to one sling of outrageous misfortune. And Jesus, I turn around and it's an arrow of outrageous misfortune from the other direction. I no longer overcome some attempted evil to be done to me. I no sooner, with the help of the gods, do that, go down to the local temple, to the place of worship to pay my respects, and on the way I get mugged. That life is episodic. It may or may not have any nexus that you can see. There may be, or may not be, in particular examples of your life, an apparent, sequential, as ordinary intellect would see it, string of cause and effect. All of that is episodic existence. All of that is the continuing perpetuation in your own intellect of life being cut up into local segments of reality. And any idea of a universal, of being able to, for instance, study man as a species rather than the individual is a dream. It's absolutely not possible. It would just be the same as if your intellect is still operating episodically. If your concept of reality is cut in sequentially, if that is the pattern, it would be the same as someone suffering from red eye attempting to study the malady of yellow jaundice. Any idea, using the intellect as it operates, any idea, even though people have such concepts and theories, any idea of being able to see some sort of universal picture of life remains a dream. It's not possible. Now, I know people try it, and I know people write books about it, and I know that life allows such as this to develop apparent ephemeral followings along some idea or somebody who believed they had an idea. But even their concept of there being some universal is episodic. In that, they will say, all right, this is universal. They might use that term. They may say this is some idea of a transcendental awareness. This is some aspect of some kind of greater cosmic universal consciousness. And you say, well, how about this over here, about people who are over here wearing old re-dyed Mussolini uniforms? No, that's not. And they don't see. The ordinary intellect cannot see that you have left even what you said was universal. You're back to there being episodic reality. If they say, well, now, in general, going by the ideas that I have, well, people who do this, it wouldn't ordinarily be them saying that they have. It would be following the ideas of our great leader, or this great book we have, this great belief system. Then all of these things listed here on pages 7 through 29, including footnotes, are good ideas. And you say, wait a minute, there's another book over here. There was a splinter group one time, or this guy, when he wrote that, he had a brother-in-law that said he was a drunkard and that he made all this up. Yeah, we know about that, and that's the kind of thing you got to avoid. It is episodic reality, even if it's in the name of the attempted universal painting of larger concepts. All right, try it this way. As long as there's a way out, you hadn't gotten anywhere. As long as there's a door out, you're not inside. Oh, you can be dreaming you are. That is, you and everybody else in wherever you are. And say, yeah, we're in here now. But as long as there's a door, you're not anywhere. It's like you're dealing with stage props, flats. You're dealing with, in the back lot, one of the Hollywood studios, you're standing there looking at what seems to be a reasonable facsimile of the Manhattan skyline, if you don't look up too high, maybe around Soho, and there it is. And that's all right as long as you do not turn around and look behind you and realize that behind me has no relationship to this. In this case, behind you being the door out. But if you don't know there's a door out, you will take what seems to be the idea, a concept, a notion that this in some way has a wider effect. This is universal. I am now beginning to see in some great, more magnanimous, wider, transcendental fashion. Well, if you are, then how about the guy over here that says that that's not true, that this is an illusion? I know about all that crap. Those people are nuts. Well, they're just wrong. As long as there's a door anywhere, I say a door out, don't get misled. As long as there's a door, you're not anywhere. There can't be a door. If there's a door, it goes, I'll tell you where it goes. Don't worry about the Rod Serling dimension or that it goes into wherever Elvis is. If there's a door, I'll tell you exactly where that door goes. It goes to a local reality. And as long as there's a local reality behind this, whatever it is that a person thinks they see, then what they think they see is what? Local reality with a fancy front. And that's it. You could look, if you wanted to, at this kind of activity as being an attempt individually to produce, and I'll give you a door if you want to use it. It's a faux door, but it's kind of, you could look at it as being the attempt to produce, at least intellectually. That was the four-door. Not the four-door, the faux door. Got nothing to do with Henry T. or his children. A faux door. Of course, in Alabama, a faux door sounds like a four-door, don't it? At least intellectually, is to produce in the individual more of a universal during these years that you got in the abattoir queue. But it's to be able to do that. Well, speaking of, even though that wasn't the point, good and evil, good and bad, what do you think giveth with the worldwide, with the historic, proverbial claim that evil, bad news, rides a swift stallion, bad news, and good news is astride a mule. I don't know whether I read that or made it up, but You get the gist, do you not? It's a new proverb. Is that bad news, very swift, no holding it back. Whereas good news is always slow to be carried about, to be spread out in a locale amongst people. At the 3D level, that is quite capable of being evidenced. But what giveth, regardless of whether it's correct in a wider sense, but why is it that people perceive that to be true? Why is it accepted to be true even beyond the axiomatic level? It just seems to be true without any great analysis or any debate. An ordinary person might say, well, there's got to be maybe some exception, but there is much validity to such a proverb. Just amongst ordinary people, amongst your own circle of acquaintances, something that somebody does good, something an institution does good. People are not that inclined to talk about it, to say, oh, I meant to tell you about so-and-so. Whereas if it seems to be bad news, it seems to travel almost at the speed of thought. Why might that be? And anyone who's getting good, of course, and one of your coeval questions, if you're going to consider such as that question, you can go ahead and try and ponder it, but also ponder the questionable validity of even the terms good news and bad news. Not one at a time or you won't get anywhere. Oh, you might end up on a mule ranch, but you've got to be able to consider the question, why is it that good news does seem to travel so fast, bad news and good news travel so slow? Take that as one knock that you put upon your own door, but then you can take a knock on your own door also as to the whole matter of the question, the validity of such terms as good news and bad news. And if you got real good, you could come up with a third knock at least, but it's got to be simultaneous. And that is, well, is this absolutely correct in some defensible sense? Does it actually do that? And those are really good. You could add a fourth knock or 3.5 knock and say, well, whether it's correct or not, what giveth that people believe it's true? So at least you got 4 knocks, but if you're going to do anything with them, you've got to be able to entertain them all simultaneously. If you do them sequentially, you'll come up perhaps with something, but what will it be? Well, we can call it an answer of some kind. But why not be more specific and call it what it is? An episodic answer. Which, if you're getting at all good at this, you know is very, very satisfying. It's just as satisfying as a faux pizza. Do you realize the metaphorical significance of a sheetrock screw falling on one's foot? I don't either. Another note, another thing I made note of, you have heard some mention around areas like this, but it was another prime example. It's right down the middle of the road in where life is operating in the 3rd month of 1990, having individual and institutional significance on a wide level, environmental concerns. There was a note made in the news that the locale of a certain, it was a big time, worldwide environmental organization has been meeting at the same location for the last few years. And somebody, and not some ordinary critic, opponent of the environmental movement, but somebody noted, and they could not disagree, that the locale, the physical locale where they had been meeting, was being unquestionably damaged by their presence. Now, cannot we hope that some, if not all of you, are getting good enough to realize, to dare to realize, that this is not irony. This is the case of the inevitable. You've got to dare to do it. Not dare to be great. That guy's in jail that talks that. Well, he may be out, but he's broke. You got to dare to be able to think beyond any local reaction, because irony, being just a form of nervous system hostility beyond the motor and limbic level, irony is everywhere, as I have tried to get you to consider. Anything that lives long enough, and it may only take a minute, will finally show undeniable signs of irony. It will have to. It may be right before it dies. It may be right before it splits and clones itself. It may be right before it goes on to even bigger and better whatevers. But rather than seeing, being able to dare rather than to see it as being, how ironic. See it as how inevitable. I was going to give you a corollary, but let me remind you, you heard it pointed out not too long ago that, perhaps I let Kairoot do it, but the fact that all problems are caused by someone trying to help, which is not ironic. It's not sarcastic. It's inevitable. But I was going to give you sort of a version 2 of that, more verbally in line with what I was talking about just now. All attempts to help the environmental group getting together to plan their strategy to help the environment, and of course they're beginning to destroy the environment where they meet every year. All attempts to help, to do good, must result in doing harm to someone. And the someone could be something. If we were not talking about individuals, we would be talking about ideas, theories, institutions. But it is inevitable. I don't use that when I kept saying inevitable just as a catchword for something to oppose, to contrast to irony. Any attempt to help, any attempt to do good, and right now we'll ignore that knock on the door, that we won't question what the do good is. If someone, an individual, an institution, some large segment of life's body via man, if it says this will do good, I'm not questioning that. But to do that, to attempt it, must, I repeat, must do harm to someone. Now the harm is not my definition. I'll let those who are doing good, and this is still no sarcasm, they would have to agree. They would not see the point to it. They would have to agree that if I said harm gets done, the environmentalist will assume, which is a safe assumption, that this environmental group is primarily populated by the middle class of life's intellectual nervous system. And so that is, let's say that was somebody out, maybe they're meeting in a government park, in a national park somewhere that's been turned over to them. And maybe it is an outsider, maybe it's a park ranger, finally points out that the last few years we have noticed a specific deterioration of the ecosystem around here, the grounds themselves, that you people meeting here. I'm in favor personally of what you're doing, but what you're doing is you are doing what may be irreversible damage here. In other words, you're attempting to do good by meeting here and playing your strategies, and this guy says, but you're doing harm. You do understand that the environmentalists, just under ordinary conditions, will assume that he is pointing out something that is true at ground level. They would go, you are correct. They would not see any greater ramifications of what I'm telling you, that all attempts to do good, by anybody's definition, I won't question their definition, any attempt to do good must do harm to someone. Harm's not my definition. Again, it would be theirs. This is not, it has nothing to do with morality. But it's any attempt to do good will produce to someone evil. It's not open to question. It's got nothing to do with spirituality, metaphysics, New Age hocus pocus. All it's got to do with is physics. Yeah, but That doesn't sound very romantic or poetic. As us physicists say, I'm hip. Of course, does that sound like a three-dimensional oxymoron? A hip physicist. Well, you could say he would have to be, if it was a true three-dimensional physicist, you'd have to say he was pretty hip to even say he was, even if he wasn't. But he'd have to be sort of hip to go, I'm hip. If anybody followed that, then you might ought to go look out the window under the bed. There could be an environmental fascist lurking. They're strong on lurking. That's one way you spot them. I had another little piece of something that I never did turn into a story or Kairoot. But here it is. Go ahead and get it out of the way, and then I can relieve the stress, the lurking of this idea that says, make me into a story, make me into a story. I got enough to do. It would have to do with over in another future. The battle, in quotation marks. You know what that is. Everybody knows. The battle. It's their version of it. The struggle. The war. The battle over in this other future is between, now listen, it's between the creatures that believe that talk is something that they do and talk itself, which sees the creatures as simply its operational medium. I wish I had gone ahead and made a story out of that, because I would love to hear the rest of that. All right, let's take the hard way out. It seemed like everybody followed that, whether you know what to do with it or not. Now, take this future. Put it right in your own nervous system. You individually. You singularly. Does it make any more sense now? Does it make any kind of new sense, different sense? That inside of one's own intellect, if you could push the boundaries, that you're beginning to get close to your own different future, outside the ordinary runnings of your chemical and electrical brain operations. That the battle, it seems to be going on, the conversation between the partners. If this battle became, or was looked at as being between creatures that took talk to be, I mean, it doesn't seem to be opening any kind of great discussion, the creatures right in here, these different collections of brain operations, they take talk as being something that they do. Who's going to naysay that? But now look at it, that its opposition, still in here, is talk itself. Not other brain cells, not different opinions, not different creatures. You understand what the story does? It's divided in, not into, we take all the creatures that are your brain operations. We haven't divided them into two different camps. It's all of your brain operations are one faction in the battle. And this faction, all of these things that talk, take talk to be something they do. But in this case, the opposition turns out to be the thing that they do. That is, talk. And talk's view is different. Talk's view of the creatures is that they're simply a medium. That talk just uses them. Since it costs no more to you or I, may I encourage you to consider that further. How about another one that is pretty subtle, that I recall I started to turn into some kind of story? But let's plow it under and move on. And it goes sort of like this, is what giveth and to what ends. might things be arranged to wit, that men of all stripes speak so forcefully, with so much assurance, either pro or con, about matters. Let's take one that's still going on. Capital punishment, or abortion, the drug war, but let's capital punishment. We hadn't used that one. That ordinary men of all stripes, all intellectual backgrounds, all degrees of expertise or lack thereof, the man in the street, but all the way from that to people with credentials in criminology, attorneys. I said people with credentials. Never mind. Don't any attorneys write me, you fascist. And don't any fascists write me and say I insulted you. Back to capital punishment is not the point, but I just use an example to give you a good hard diving board to spring from again. But you have people, you know this, you can turn on the news at any time, or you look out in the streets and there are demonstrations. Reasonable, intelligent people in positions of authority, speaking in the forcefulness and the assurity, pro and con, it doesn't matter. What I want you to, I was saying, is a pretty subtle aspect of it, is they speak as though there is undeniable, but there is an undeniable crucible. There is a paradigm of truth supporting their position that is extrinsic to them. I told you it was subtle now. Don't think you see it and don't. People speak. Now disregard, they may say, well, we have some statistical evidence, not conclusive, I'll agree, that shows that having capital punishment on the books does not noticeably alter the crime rate. Beyond that, when men seem to be waxing philosophically, that a man, if he's on TV, they flash under here, Senator so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so, PhD, and he says, it is more than me speaking as a figure from the world of academia. It is more than me bringing forth statistics, which we can prove this or that. I am simply saying to those who will listen to me, since I am fortunate enough to have some sort of public forum here, I am simply saying that this is the 20th century. We are humane, decent, intelligent men and women. There is no longer any excuse whatsoever, no matter the crime, for us in an institutionalized, collective manner to do murder to our fellow man and simply call it capital punishment, when it is nothing but murder. The sound of it, and it's more than the sound. It's not that the man's trying to pull off a sham, because I could take the other position, but you've heard it all your life, about all sorts of areas. But there is an assurance, not just in the guy, not just in the speaker, but in the listeners. And I don't mean just his supporters, even those that oppose him, even those that seem to have no great feeling one way or the other. They just may be flicking the channels through and get this guy. If I ask such a person that seems to have no great interest in the question of capital punishment, they would say, well, these guys are, whatever they're doing, to me it's fairly irrelevant, but there is at least a kind of heartfelt passion in both sides. You understand, it's not the one speaker, it's not one group. It is the extended milieu. It's an inside-out milieu, of course. It is the environment being the fish and the fish being the water, and there's no way to separate them. But that the speakers, life is speaking through people here and there, but the speech is on the basis, without any analyzation, without specifically being referred to, of course, but on the non-specified basis, that there is an incontrovertible proof of this that nobody ever thinks to question. They're not supposed to, of course. Now, if you did try to question some people, if they were religious, if they were Christian, Judaic Christian background, let's say, if you said, well, wait a minute, who are you to stand up here in the middle of the street? I had an aunt that got killed by some murderer. I got some interest in this. Who in the hell are you to stand there and say that we should not collectively exercise capital punishment? And where do you get off doing that? I know you got a degree and all that, and you got the bullhorn there, and you got the stage, but where do you get that? All right, now ordinary people, if they were still religiously primed and wired, they might say, sir, would you refer to such and such book in the Bible, or if it's other religions, in the Quran? But you don't have to take it that far, which would simply be taking a first story from life and would be inconclusive if you can follow what I've tried to get you to see before. It does not even have to be specific. They do not have to be asked because the question normally does not arise. The opponents, if there's one man up speaking in favor of capital punishment, the opponents, we're talking about the normal arena of life out there struggling with itself, internally, growing, moving energy around. Even the opponents, they do not stand up to the guy in favor of capital punishment and say, wait a minute, where do you get the idea that it's good, that it's proper, that it's acceptable? They don't ask that. Do you hear me? Now don't get sidetracked. Don't let your own little everyday intellect get you sidetracked like somebody stand and say, wait a minute. We got statistics showing that having capital punishment on the books here and there and in this and that year and this had no effect. And where are your figures? And he said, wait a minute. We had a poll made. I'm not talking about that. Which is, again, just a sidetrack. Is to come to an inconclusive conclusion, a first story of sorts. It is that no one asked, why are you standing there speaking so forcefully? You seem to have no doubt whatsoever of your position. And the position, as they would call it, did not come about through this man sitting somewhere and studying the figures. If they got in that discussion, I know again that a man might say, well, at one time, I was sort of unsure about what my feelings were about capital punishment, but then I studied the latest figures. Now I went back and I looked at some of the other figures in some of the other countries, and Scandinavian countries, and how long they've been without capital punishment, and the figures do not lie, and so I came to this conclusion. You know. Now that's true enough, but you people have got to know how life works by now. You know, the intellect's always the last to know. Oh, these are stories made up after school when you get home and your mother says, why is your nose bleeding? You go, you know, a dragon jumped out and kicked me in the nose. The question never arises, even from the apparent opposing camp, as to the validity, the passion, what seems to be the unspecified underpinnings that someone says, by God, we should not do this. Or, of course, by God, we should do this. All of this is operational on an unspecified, tacit basis that there is some paradigmatic pattern of truth, forget the Bible and things that they'd point at, but that there is some reality such as should we collectively exercise capital punishment? Let's say that that is the thing, the question, the problem. It's the thing. So I'll go ahead and I'll call it the question. That the question in some way exists outside of man. That the answer exists some way outside of the individual human skull. That's subtle, but it's not that hard to see. It's just that your skull doesn't want to see it. It's got no need to see it. It's along the same kind of areas as people accepting, even people with no metaphysical or weird inclinations intellectually, accepting the fact that there are some things, at least theoretical, information, feelings, experiences that are possible beyond the five senses. Oh yeah? And the skull can't do anything. You can just say, well, they are. You know, explain this to me. And you can't say, well, wait a minute, explain to me how you can even ask me to explain it. And you say it's beyond the senses. To try and, which would be, of course, as always, a waste of time, but to try and get ordinary people to see that no matter how important, no matter how cosmic, no matter how universal, no matter how pressing, may seem to be the question, such as the question of capital punishment. They cannot see that there is no question, problem, idea of capital punishment outside the human skull, outside the brain, not the actual act of executing somebody. But without this as being the valve for the idea of capital punishment to come out, if we had been waiting, let us say, for beavers to come up with the idea of capital punishment, let's say that civilization has gone along more or less as it has, but the question of, quote, capital punishment has never come up. Nobody had ever thought about, let's all get together and kill somebody that doesn't act the way that we think he should in our collective wisdom. Let's assume that had never come up, pro or con. Nobody ever thought about it. If you're waiting for fishers or mink or beavers to come up with the idea, you do see, don't you? Please say you do. That we still would not have capital punishment any more than if we had waited on aardvarks to come up with the idea of religion and confession. We'd still be all living in a sorry state of affairs. Any secondary human activity, which by now you know what I intend, that covers almost everything except a few little specifics. They would not be in existence, pro or con, right or wrong, this or that, in favor, out of favor, if they did not come out of this. That is where life sends the information, and it originates here, and then it comes out here. It is then, as always, beyond any need, much less the ability for an ordinary man to analyze it, to look at it. They simply accept it, especially important things, like let's say to many people, the question of capital punishment, disarmament, abortion, freedom of religion, whatever the pressing problems. It is beyond the need, much less the ability for an ordinary man's intellect to question the unspoken acceptance of the fact that the reality of this thing, not the act of executing, not the act of aborting a woman's pregnancy, not that, the argument, the so-called problem, should we do it or should we not do it, that the answer somewhere lies, I don't know where, but in other words, the answer, all right, I'll put it this way, so I'm speaking for ordinary people. All right, the answer, I'll put it to you this, the answer is the objective truth is we should not be doing that. Now that's true whether I say it, whether somebody else says it. That was true before I was born, and it'll be true when I'm dead. That is, the truth exists. What am I trying to say? The truth exists regardless of human support or opposition. That's it. That's what I'm trying to say. Well, where does it exist? Well, I can't go out and show it to you. There's some things that exist that are just, I mean, they're not subject or limited to our senses. Oh, that crap again. I mean, that argument again. Guess you got me. But do make a note. Don't let the subtleness throw you. Not the act of executing someone or the act of continuing to build war machinery. It's what seems to be, with no questions, no ability to analyze it, that the solution, the correct answer, my response to the question of should we or should we not do so-and-so, that the answer somewhere is outside of man. Not just those still wired up religiously that, well, God said so. Well, how do we know he said so? Well, he told Amos, and he wrote that book. Yeah, I know you're looking funny, but now I don't mean that Amos, he was a good prophet. Now, I don't mean that he just one night had a few drinks and said, hey, a guy showed up my door and said, hello, I'm Jehovah, and I want to tell you this and that. No. He spoke to Amos, and I know he did. He spoke to him like through the Spirit. Well, he spoke to him beyond the senses. You do not have to be still wired up that way to be religious and say, well, all right, it's wrong to kill our fellow man because that this book said so, or because one guy said that God said so. You don't even have to do that. Don't even take it that far, or don't take it that near. No one, atheist, humanistic atheist, I guess is the up-to-date term, and many of them, I'm sure, would say, or some of them would say, we should not have capital punishment. It's got nothing to do with morality. It has to do with being civil. It has to do with us being humane, thinking creatures. All right. Well, where did that come from? Well, it's just a fact. It's just true. The ordinary intellect is not wired up to see anything that you, at the ordinary level, that you say you think is true, that you say is an objective, a cosmic truth. It came from one place, and nobody can begin to look at this. And you cannot wave your hands and say, well, the truth is everywhere, or this is a truth regardless of whether I said it or not. It came from right here in you individually. Life ran it right through you, and yet it is taken as a non-specified, an unspoken fact that the proof that there is an external floating somewhere crucible of all the questions, a proof. All you got to do, life is going to grind out finally the truth, and it will triumph over everything. Except maybe the San Francisco Giants or somebody. But it's taken as an unexamined fact that something exists outside the human skull. That is, in secondary matters. And they're all secondary matters if it is a, quote, problem or a question. Should we or should we not do that? It's a secondary matter. Notice, primary matters are never a problem. Primary matters are not open to discussion. Should we, as humans, should we eat or not? As humans, should we engage in sex or not? Should we be concerned about dining? Should we overeat? Should we less? Should we be having this much cholesterol in our diet? Should we engage in sexual activities that require the use of a rubber band and the fourth volume of the Encyclopedia Britannica? Or should we not? It has to get into the secondary, into the gradual expansion aspects. We have to be questioning dining as opposed to eating, or specific sexual practices that do not seem to be, quote, natural to some people. That you got to sort of think about it and go out of your way. You got to be advertised. You got to have some instructions about, well, that sounds pretty weird. How do you do it? Somebody has to say, well, you know, they have to be described to you. And you go, well, I never thought about that. We're talking about secondary matters. It is only in secondary affairs, reflections of primary affairs, that questions arise. You know, the question, should we or should we not allow this kind of sexual activity? Should we or should we not have capital punishment? It must come from here. There's nowhere else it comes from. And then, still, I'm about to leave this, but I want you, there's a reason. Because it takes place in you, whether you have any interest, apparently, in abortion, capital punishment, sexual morality. It happens in you continually that you believe the human nervous system is wired up at the ordinary level to simply accept the fact that in the pressing problems, the questions that plague men's soul, that there are answers, there are solutions, or there's further proofs, no matter what it's called, but it's all on the unspecified basis that these paradigms exist somewhere outside of the skull that's asking it, or the skull that accepts, so yes, that is a problem, or yes, that is a question worthy of an intelligent man's further consideration. So I'll study the problem, I'll investigate, I'll consider other statistics. In other words, I will go off on the world's, from a more radical view, I will go off on one of the world's greater errands of folly. Except, you know, it's not funny at the ordinary level, because this errand of folly can be, do I actually support the killing of unborn children, known as abortion? Am I in favor of capital punishment, frying our fellow man, or not? I mean, it's serious business to life and to ordinary people. But to go off there, I'm going to consider this. I'm going to look somewhere beyond my skull for an answer. Well, everybody needs a hobby. Travel is a decent hobby. But as you should know, it's always, as far as there being any answer or solution, as always, it's simply a matter of whether each individual person, I'm back talking at the ordinary level, is whether they are wired and primed up to think in this way or that way about such matters as the institutionalized execution of our fellow man. That's it. Except ordinary intelligence, or the ordinary operations of the human nervous system up this level, has no need to and cannot see that as being an answer, because at that level it is not an answer, of course. But they cannot even look, rather than saying, well, what do I think about this? Or I should consider some of the evidence, pro and con. Or I should consider it further. Or I have a feeling that there is a real answer. I'm not going to sit in here the rest of my life and think, am I for or against capital punishment? I look at some of the figures over here and I think this, and then I look at those figures. It's still, it's like a lurking shadow in the human nervous system over people's shoulder that I guess I'm being a little too intellectually ambiguous about this, because the feeling stays that there is an answer. There is a right answer. There is a correct position in all of these serious questions. But the thing is that the solution or the answer to this correct position is not in me, because if it's in me, I just look and say, oh, okay, well, that's it. It's on, well, it's like I've got to look. They may not call it that. And when I said a fool's errand, of course, I didn't mean the travel had to be actually physical. But it's the feeling as though that this correct position that I know is there, whether it be religiously based or not, but it's somewhere outside of my skull. Well, if you find it, right. Be sure it's in a letter so that you can send a little something of interest along. It doesn't do for you people out there on tape. I don't advise any further trying to scotch tape money to a postcard. No offense to our fine institutions, but I don't know, there may be some people less than absolutely honest working for the Postal Service. Because I know many people that send me postcards asking for my advice on social matters and matters of etiquette, and many of you, in fact, many of you, make a note that on the card that you point out that you attach, or you stapled a $100 bill or something. And I hardly ever, the money's never there. Hardly ever. Well, never there, now I think about it. Well, no matter. About to run out of time, so here we go. How about one end up with even more subtle? How about man's, again, worldwide and historic fascination with secrets? And it has turned into, much more recent than recently, by the way, it has always become, unbeknownst to man in a certain way, that this interest, this fascination with secrets, becomes a kind of secondary dealing with the idea of the secrets being the secret. And I'm going to straighten that out a little bit, I think. I could use religions, but how about the Freemasons, the Masons? They have, under different names, and Illuminati and all sorts of things, but now I guess the Masons would be the catch-all phrase. Now, especially now that we're going to bring it up to date, but now have a fascination. They are considered also to be part of a good social and business network, but there is still, in all kinds of organizations, and I could have thrown in the church in capital C's, that there is a belief, there is an accepted belief that such groups have a secret, know a secret. And people want to join up. They want to be made privy to the secrets that the Masons have, to go through the initiation ritual, which is of course secret, but to have the secrets revealed. Now, when I said that this fascination that life is already wired into people, it's not psychological. It's got nothing to do with secret societies. It's got nothing to do with any ordinary, verbally describable affair other than the fact it's the energy behind it. But let us take ideas such as the Masons, and if any of you want to plug in somebody else, but that they have secret, very secret initiation rituals to, of course, initiate the initiate into the secrets. When I say it turns into a secondary dealing with the secret, and the secret unbe recognized by a man becoming, that is, the idea of the secret itself becoming the secret. And my promise to try and straighten it out, and we got 2 minutes. Somebody, make up my fictitious story. A person goes through all of the procedures to get invited to be checked out, and they agree to let him become a Mason. And the big night arrives, and they bring him in, they put him through the procedure. Several hours of all kinds of smoke and mirrors and blindfolds and holding daggers and talking in several languages, making him sit down and stand up, and other people sitting around in masks and all sorts of uniforms. He goes through the secret ritual so as he is now initiated. And it turns out that the secret amounts to no more than the secret of the rituals. Now, of course, they don't put it this way. But do you hear me? It turns out that the secret, there is no secret information. There is no secret knowledge. The secret was the secrets of the ritual to initiate you into the secret society. The secrets are no more than the secrets themselves. Now and the men are so left, take this far beyond the Masons. Think about all the rituals of all the religions, although they may not seem to be that secret. It's supposed to be at least there's some kind of secret information that if you do join in the rituals and begin to go to Mass, or you begin to go and do temple and do whatever it is, you follow all the precepts of Islam, that there is going to be secrets revolved once you begin to take up the rituals. But the secrets turn out to be no more than what the secret is, the secret itself. But then, let me ask you this. Do you ever hear of, do you think that there are periodic riots going on these nights of initiation, say, at the Masons? That a guy goes through all of this and has to come up with money and goes through all this, and they get through for the night and they congratulate him, give him a secret handshake and say, you're now one of us and you're now into secrets. And he says, wait a minute. You mean going through all this, what else is there? What's the real secrets? And they go, well, you're one of us now. You now know the secret rituals, which he had to go through and put his hand on a Bible upside down or the Koran under his armpit and hold a dagger and swear that if he ever told the secrets of the ritual, that may his mother die a horrible death and him become a Republican or something. He did that, but do you hear about there being riots? And somebody attacking the heads of these lodges or priests or rabbis for somebody to say, wait a minute, now I know the secrets of the rituals, but now you go, where's the rest? And they go, look, what rest? Do you hear of riots, attacks? Not hardly. Not hardly. We're absolutely out, so maybe I will have to pick it up again, but I was going to leave you with it right quick. Does that strike any note in you? Forget the Masons and churches and all, but how about what seems to be the ritualistic initiation of yourself by life? Of what seems to be all of these sort of, whether they be real specific or not, these kind of promises that, well, as you go along, or if you do this, and you get healthier psychologically, or you give up certain bad habits, or you're nicer to your mother, or you do become a Republican like God wants, or whatever, that if you go through these kind of things, there's more behind the door. The secret is for us to tell you how to open the door. And you find out, you open the door, and there's nothing there. And the secret was that, well, at least you know how to open the door, and nobody wants to talk about it anymore. It's just, as I said, my rhetorical question, have you ever heard of there being some sort of mass murder or mayhem going on, and it turned out it happened at initiation night at your local Mason's Lodge, or at some church? But from one view, you'd think, wait a minute, this guy, it took him months, and he spent thousands of dollars getting all these phony baloney uniforms and dressing up and went through all this, and they show him the ritual, and then they all pat him on the back, and they opened a bottle of champagne and said, you're now one of us. And he went, where's the rest? Nobody ever says that. Now, I'm not going to say that nobody ever thinks that. But no one ever says, wait a minute. Because they have at least been made privy to the secrets of the ritual to initiate you into the secret. Except it turns out that that is the extent of the secret. Oh, well, could I have a glass? God, it's good to be a Mason. Well, we're absolutely out of tape, so bye.